All right, welcome to the Back2NY event. How do we get, oh yeah, okay. Okay, Back2NY event, what is this? Everyone who's been here probably read the program, and that's why you're here. So CCN started in New York, Uptown, 2017, had its inaugural conference at Columbia University. And we thought it's a good time to reflect a little bit. So in between, there were fantastic conferences in North America and in Europe. And this year, we are back in New York. Yeah, and we want to use the opportunity to reflect a little bit looking back, but mostly looking forward. And it's not just because we're back to New York, but I think for many of us, it's like a moment of reflection on CCN. I think most of us love CCN. I think it's great. But it's a reflection like, what are we doing here? What should we be doing? And so my kind of personal anecdote for this is in 2017, a little later actually, I joined Columbia, and I remember in the lab looking at these pictures. These are reconstructions from variational autoencoders. And we looked at these blurry images and we're like, this is never going to work. Like training on predictive loss. We need to inject all these important cognitive and neuroscientific inductive biases into these networks. Without this, it's never going to work. So now, 26, I just described the scene to ChatGPT, and it's generating this image of pictures me in the lab with my lab mates discussing this. It even unblurred the images on the desk, which is quite impressive. So I think every one of you has some of these anecdotes, and of course, CCN doesn't have just this as a purpose, but I think that's part of a reflection we might be having at the moment. So today, we have a brief moment on reflecting on the past, but it's mainly just for setting context. Mainly we're interested in looking forward, and for this, we asked you, CCN, to provide answers to a survey, and we'll hear a bit more about the procedure today. Okay, looking backwards, you might have seen this nice poster where you can place your own pin where you belong. So I thought it was an interesting way of looking at how CCN might have changed over the years. This from Oxford, Boston, and Amsterdam. And so I with some help, again, from some AI, I created these density maps where these pins are. And so you might see some change. So maybe in 26, we're moving slightly more towards AI to the top right. Yeah, but unfortunately, we don't have the data from the other years. So I trained a CCN foundation model. And now we can do extrapolation, obviously very reliable. So 26, we'll see whether this is true. Apparently, we're moving a bit more towards AI, even more. But you can also look back. And I promise you it was a one-shot, I didn't tweak this. So when we extrapolate backwards, this model thinks we started in Cogneuro, which I think is not that wrong. So I think that's not quite right. We had more interest in AI back then. But I thought it was an interesting small trend in the field. We're moving a bit more towards AI. So Nutrida has a bit more to say on substantial data.
Okay, so we're going to take a closer look at the numbers, as Benjamin Peters mentioned. So here we're looking at the total accepted submissions into the CCN from 2017 to this year. And you can see that we started around 250, and this year we have 579 accepted submissions. And out of all of the submissions, so we have out of all of the years, so we have almost 3,000 accepted submissions from when we started in 2017. An amazing graduate student in the lab, Kahini Mehta, actually built this CCN submission visualizer that would allow us to actually track the trends of the submissions over the years. And so what stood out to us, two things that we thought would be really cool to share today, but also she has a poster this afternoon, and so she'd be excited to talk to you guys to show you the visualizer as well. So the largest rise in the submission has topics related to AI, large language model, and also neural networks, as you might expect it. The resurgence as a trend is neural population geometry and also dynamics, where we actually see a dip and then a resurgence in recent years. And so this is a QR code to the visualizer, so you will be able to search your past submissions, and you will be able to see a UMap plot of your neighboring submissions as well across the years. And so the next part, we are going to be talking a little bit more about the culture and also some of the survey questions that you guys share, responses that you guys share with us.
Okay, thanks everyone. So we sent out a survey, which we'll say a little bit more about, and we've made a nice word cloud of just your words that you use to describe the CCN culture. And I think that really what stands out here is, you know, collaborative, inclusive, innovative, young. That's I guess maybe that goes along with vibrant, but I think that this really does capture what the community thinks about CCN right now. And so another thing that stands out, which also came about from our survey responses, was this quote, which was, "CCN is not scared of philosophical debates." And that's what leads us into the rest of the discussion today. So we are introducing the Back to New York crowdsourced panel discussion. So how did this come about? We talked about the fact that we're back in New York, and essentially, we initially started off thinking, well, maybe we'll have a fireside chat. We'll talk about where CCN has went. But the thing that kept coming up is that we couldn't figure out who would be on that panel. And one of the things is that panels oftentimes have a small number of speakers that will really dominate the conversation. And so CCN is not afraid to try new things. So what we wanted to do is open this panel discussion up broadly to all of CCN to voice their perspectives. So we sent around this Back to New York survey this summer, and we actually got a decent number of responses. So we got 62 responses, which we would like to argue is a statistically significant sample of the conference attendees. Sure, maybe it could be a little bit higher, but we have additional people in this room right now to help correct some of the biases that may have been present in the survey. So what we're going to do is, in this survey, some of you said that you were willing to have your names associated with your answer. For those, we have basically chosen a representative samples of your quotes, which we will summarize in the coming slides. But then other people said that they were willing to engage actively during the debate. So for you, if you see your name at the bottom right corner of a slide, we would really like you to present your answer live. And in order to do so, your name will show up here. Practically speaking, please raise your hand when you see your name show up so that we can get a microphone to you. There will also be time for additional audience questions, comments, and responses. And we really just want to say that we encourage students and postdocs to share their thoughts. We want to hear from people who maybe wouldn't be at a typical panel for CCN. And finally, one last thing, when you get a microphone, say your name and try and keep your responses under 1 minute. 30 seconds is even better. It means that we can get more responses. And in order to help facilitate this, we have added timers to the slides, which we will start. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We will cut you off. And then finally, as we're moving into this, I just want to bring this back up and say, remember, this is the culture of CCN. So keep this in mind also for the debate. Have an open mind, try and maybe engage with something new. These are the 3 main topics that we'll go through. First off, we're going to get a little bit nitty-gritty. We'll think about how we can model biological systems. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about how we might do science differently and what the purpose really should be of CCN. So this first topic is mainly reflecting on what you said in the survey, and these second 2 topics, we really do want to hear from you and additional people in the audience. So with that said, I'm going to pass it off to Nitita for the first topic.
Okay, so the first question, how to think about modeling biological systems. So here we are going to review some of the responses that we got, and as Janelle mentioned, in the second and the third main questions, we are going to get people in the audience to also discuss. So 3 sub-questions that belong to this main question that were heavily discussed or responded to in our survey are, can artificial neural network models be mechanistic models? What does understanding mean? And what biology is missing from the current models? So starting off with the first sub-question. So when we read through all of your responses, we found that people came up with 3 ways to say no to this question. And so, for example, we have Andrew saying that biology doesn't matter. Sort of kidding, but directionally, I think this is a useful take. Wink. Aki said that building a computational model that can perform a cognitive ability doesn't necessitate that your model is helping you understand human cognition any better. And lastly, we have Dirk, who mentioned that ANNs are function approximators, and if not augmented by biologically plausible biophysics models, ANNs are quite meaningless for biological intelligence studies. And also, we had looked at your agree or disagree responses, and over here we found that 3 of the main questions that people disagreed on, that you guys disagreed on, are ANNs can serve as a mechanistic models. We have 10 people who disagree on that. We need to study biological brains. We have a little bit more people who disagree on that. And also CCN has a mature methodology. So that's the question, that's the most popular question that most of you guys disagree on. And Janelle and Benjamin will also talk more about that in the second and third main topics as well. And so over here for the second sub-question, so if we're thinking about the second question, what does understanding mean? So we thought that it would be cool to try to take a look at all of the submissions over the years and see the trend of how certain keywords were used in the submissions. So here we extracted the numbers that you would be able to get yourself if you were to look at the CCN visualizer that Kahini built essentially. So here, if you were to put in keyword predict, you can see that we have a big rise in that trend, but that is not the case for example, the word understand. And you can hear more about how the search engine was built at Kahini's poster. We're also curious to hear your thoughts on how we can actually develop, how we incorporated large language model in the way we're doing the match with keywords and also searching as well. And so we found some very interesting answers to this question. And for example, Dongyan mentioned today's standards have shifted toward functional sufficiency and mechanistic interpretability, while Maggie mentioned that deep neural network models have shifted how we think about understanding. And so we now believe that we can understand a system by its architecture, objective function, learning rule, and training data without really understanding detailed computation. And lastly, we thought we would have Megan Peters to also talk about how she responded to this question as well.
Super. Hi, I'm Megan. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I think for me, in my old age now, I've become more of a philosopher, and since CCN does not shy away from philosophical debates, I thought it'd be fun to bring up philosophy of science and how it talks about the nature of explanation and understanding. And there's a lot of parallels between the way explanation is talked about in the philosophy of science, mechanistic or causal explanations versus topological or structural explanations, and the way we think about modeling. So Diane and Abbott talk about what, how, and why models, and Mar talks about implementation versus algorithmic or computational models. And the same kinds of diversity and heterogeneity of explanations, I think, have been talked about a lot in the philosophy of science. There was a really beautiful paper in Nature Reviews Neuroscience 2 years ago about the role of mechanistic explanations in neuroscience by Lauren Ross and Danny Bassett that I find really inspiring. And Lauren Ross has a book that just came out last year on the nature of these different kinds of explanations. So this is really just a plea to continue thinking about what it means to explain and understand, and to actually rely on the background that philosophy of science can provide to us for this and not kind of revert into our intuitive feeling of like, oh, explanation is just I can write down an explanation. Or understanding is like, I feel like I can grok it. And so like getting out of this kind of intuitive feeling of what it means to explain or understand and relying on the philosophy of science more, I think would be really great for this community. Not that we're not doing it already, but that there's a lot of insights there that intersect with the way we think about models and the philosophy of modeling that we can borrow from philosophy of science and philosophy of biology.
Thank you so much for the answer. Yeah, so I think we have a lot to think about when it comes to the definition of understanding, and we will continue to think about that and work on defining or learning from people who define understanding already. So lastly, the last sub-question under how to think about modeling biological systems, we have what biology is missing from the models. And so when we looked at the responses that you guys shared with us, we summarized the results in the next slide. But also one thing that kind of after seeing the responses made us do was we went to try different keywords over the almost 3,000 submissions, right, that we have over 8 years. So over here you can see that certain keywords seem to not be represented too much in our submissions. So on the left we have spiking or spike, and then we have a little bit or a lot less for submissions with the topics or the keywords of transmitter and neuromodulator. So over here, if we were to look at the top responses under different categories or keywords, we see that we really do agree that neuromodulators, neurotransmitter, hormones, metabolic, energetic cause, and so on are or seem to be missing from the past 8 years of submissions. And we also have some other responses as well that you guys can see on the screen. But overall, we think that this is really interesting to think about, and this also leads us into thinking about the future of CCN and the following discussion topics as well. And relatedly, based on this question of what biology is missing from the models, we have, for example, 3 people who elaborated more on their responses. For example, we have Ralph saying that spiking stochastic algorithms compute per watt. The brain doesn't work with continuous quantities, but discrete spikes. We have Michael again saying that the biology and biophysics of fMRI is likely an important field that CCN often misses, considering the number of researchers using fMRI. And I'm not sure if Michael is here. If you could raise your hand, we would love to hear more from you. Maybe he's not here. Okay, and then lastly, we have Nancy Canvisher mentioning that cell types and cytoarchitecture, this could matter or not, but it would be good to find out. So I personally really like this response because it basically generated experiments or inspired potential experiments. And finally, before moving on to the other discussion topics, I just want to put back up the 3 questions, sub-questions in this category that we thought people in the audience would also like to add their opinions on as well.
Hi. Thanks so much for bringing this discussion to CCN. I want to ask or pose a question to the audience about understanding and mechanistic models and how this relates to CCN sort of following a lot of the empirical developments in machine learning. So a lot of the excitement in CCN is that finally we have image computable models that perform complex behaviors, and that solves a problem in finding those systems that can actually capture the behavior that we see in biological systems. And then we can, using those systems, interpret the neural data and come up with mechanistic predictions for neural activity. But we know that in machine learning, there are ongoing issues about understanding what what are the properties of systems that can solve a task, and whether a mechanistic interpretation of one system necessarily translates to a mechanistic interpretation of another system. So something we discussed at our K&T yesterday was this idea of solution degeneracy, that there are many possible candidate models that can perform a task, but might have differing implementations. And so I'm curious what the rest of the audience feels about how closely CCN follows the empirical frontier of machine learning, which may not have this real detailed and precise understanding of these systems, versus following some of the theoretical developments that people have established in machine learning that start to contend with these issues about what model is sufficient to solve a task, and does it actually make detailed predictions that we can understand at the neural level, or is there an alternative explanation that we haven't considered that would actually conflict the model we have in question for just thinking about single models?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so maybe we can all continue to think about this question, and then we can, sorry, go ahead. And then we can also have an open discussion at the end as well. We can bring back some of these questions.
So I love that question,
Yes.
and I want to follow up by quoting some, or following up on what Megan was saying. Jerome Bruner, in the book Acts of Meaning, he says that the cognitive revolution's ambitions were abandoned because of the limits of information processing and the fact that that was the dominant paradigm of the time. So over the past decades, since that book, I think a lot of the times, cognitive and neuroscience theory has been limited by our imagination of the possible computational models that usually has been, at least it used to be more developed by neuroscience and cognitive scientists. Now it's coming from a discipline that does not care about the brain at all. So I think that it's important for all of us to think about that, but at the same time, as someone who kind of sort of goes across all of these fields of the Venn diagram, it is interesting to still have these connectionist architectures as large toy models that we can explore certain things. One of the beautiful things we see now is that in the latent space of some of these architectures, there seems to be emergent processes and representations akin to symbolic operations. And so now we have a connectionist mechanism that's giving rise to emergent symbolic behavior and processing, which can be good for theoretical thinking. But at the same time, to go back to your question, that doesn't mean we need to go to as far as the brain is a transformer or one-to-one mapping, and I'm fully in agreement with you, and I think all of us should think about what would a brain inspired, not for the purpose of machine learning, not for the sort of, but for the purpose of understanding, which would include what Jerome Bruner considered understanding, which is not just prediction or mechanistic interpretation. What would be our imagination of models that were built by neuroscientists or built by people who care about the brain for understanding the brain as opposed to other purposes that we appropriate. So I'd love to have those conversations more broadly.
Yeah,
just quickly, I mean, this...
Let's have one more response, and sorry, I'll put up the clock, which we didn't say.
I don't see
sorry
a clock.
that it's you now, but...
Okay, when I was an undergraduate, I was into cognitive science. And then when it came time to choose a PhD trajectory, I felt like just basing inferences on behavior, on the input-output, is not enough. So when I hear Aaron pose that question, my first thought is, well, that's why we measure brain activity, right? That's why we evaluate the models not just on their behavior, but we compare them to what we measure in brains, right? And the tricky thing is that we don't have a mature methodology for making those comparisons. We have a lot of ideas, but it hasn't converged yet. And we also we haven't found the right level of description for mechanistic models yet. We don't know if rate-coded neural networks are right. We're worried that spikes might be essential, like Ralph noted there, or transmitters or modulators. And so there's so many things in motion at the same time that it's confusing. But I would argue that we should embrace that complexity, right? We should not pretend that we can tell now what the right answer is, but that's the challenge of our field. And the philosophy of science can be a great guide, but the philosophy of science is also very much in the history of physics. And so to some extent, there are limits to what even the philosophy of science can give us there, because we're really onto something entirely new here.
Okay, thanks. So I apologize for having too much material and ending these discussions. They shouldn't end, so at the end we have a bit more time. So please keep these thoughts in mind and continue these discussions. So this one was the topic which is kind of like we're all familiar to discuss and talk about, because it's at the heart of CCN, and we'll continue to discuss it every year. So we're going to broaden out a little bit, and some of the questions in the survey, they speak to broader issues. So for instance, how should we do science, right? And should we do it differently? One of the big topics, I encourage you to do this, to go back to the panel discussions in 2017, the opening, the closing one, was a lot of emphasizing bigger initiatives, tasks, scaling up. So one of the questions we had to you was, what's the role of scaling up? And there were a range of like, should we scale up and is this useful? Answers to this. So anonymous contributor said yes to everything, big data, big question, big task. I think also said like, I don't want to sound like Trump, but yeah, that's big, everything big. Nancy said we obviously need both. So boutique hypothesis-driven science, so that's maybe the opponent to scaling up and big initiatives. They will never be replaced by large data sets. Anna Leshinskaya said, what I think we really need are more quantitative models of naturalistic stimuli in order for us to control these variables. And Klaus Oberauer said, I'm skeptical actually that insights will emerge from massive data. We should work on improving our theories. So a related question here was to ask you, do you think actually CCN has a mature methodology? And we have two people speaking to this. If they're here in the room, so please raise your hand and the volunteer will come up. So your survey responses here were, I'd say like cautious, but not extremely pessimistic. So I think leaning more to the left, thinking maybe CCN doesn't yet have a fully mature methodology, but no one wanted to say strongly disagree. So let's start maybe with the first response. Who's the first one? Maggie? Yeah.
Oh, my first? Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Maggie. I think I was being a little more optimistic on this one. So I was thinking about this mostly through the lens of fMRI methods and things like encoding models, things like representational similarity analysis. So I think we've come a long way as a field in terms of having somewhat mature methods for this. And I do think CCN and these related communities are helping us a lot with how we develop these methods. We're starting to have standardized tools that at least we share across labs. We start to have things like benchmarking, things like brain score that are allowing us to do standardized model comparisons. So I do think we're moving in a good direction as a field. We're starting to have methods that we can actually use to compare models and the brain in more systematic ways. The reason I put 4 instead of 5 is because I don't think we're finished yet with this. We still have a lot of debates going on about what are the right metrics to be using. Are there a lot of limits and pitfalls to the methods that we're using? So this is why I didn't quite get to 5. But I think I'm optimistic about where we are.
Okay, thank you. And Gabriel?
Hi, yeah, I'm Gabi. Yeah, I was not entirely sure on this, and I feel like the methodology looks mature, but I'm not entirely sure whether it's like in the right direction. I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is that I'm not sure we have converged on an idea what the right kind of answer even looks like. So I'm not sure we even can evaluate whether our method is correct if we don't even know what kind of answer we want to go for, like if it's a symbolic or a sub-symbolic thing or in between. And the second thing is that most of the methods focus on representations, I feel. It's like comparing representations, characterizing representations, identifying representations, and that may just like be, and we're very good at that, and I think it's very developed methods, but representations can come apart from computation, as we have seen yesterday, and also more people are saying. And I think, and we don't have like a mature way to characterize computation. Like compare computation, right? What if a system with different representations has the same computation? I've not seen like a very converged way to say, okay, this is the way that we characterize computation in a network or in cognition. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, we can open this up to this topic. If there's any opinion or counter-opinions on whether CCN is mature in its methodology, or should we ever be? What's the role of scaling up? Should we stay to lab-based science, or have big consortia that say what we should be researching over the next 10 years, and then we all do the same?
I'm Zhongming Liu from University of Michigan. I actually attended CCN for the first meeting, and I almost attended every single meeting. I like this community a lot, but I never submit a paper. And I haven't learned a whole lot, to be honest. So, do we have mature methodology? My feeling is we do not. And I think this conference needs a lot more single unit synaptic data, circuit insight to be built into those models. As much as I like fMRI, I really hate it in terms of the limitation of offering the insight to neural computation. Right now, I actually studied fMRI for almost 25 years now, and now I think it almost offers no insight to the neural computation. But I do feel that we are close to being mature in terms of comparing models versus the brain, representation, similarity, and other type of distant metrics. And I think they're not perfect, but close to mature.
Thank you. Yeah. Someone wants to defend fMRI?
Can I make a brief comment that there's actually an extended abstract, I forget the author, so forgive me, about relating fMRI to neural computation directly. So maybe you can go talk to the authors of that. But then I also want to just say that Ida's point was really nice, that maybe we don't need a mature methodology. Maybe we should be continuously reinvestigating our methods and thinking about the assumptions that underlie them. And so maturity is not necessary.
I'll just chime in real quick. I will agree with Zhongming. I actually hate fMRI. In fact, the first lab meeting I ever gave was titled "Why fMRI Sucks." And those who know me, it's a little ironic, given you probably associate me with fMRI. I just want to make a few random comments on the earlier issues. Biological detail obviously is a huge open question. I resonate with Nico there. And I will just put this out there. I assume the reason we do what we do is because it's easy, and there's practical reasons why people use fMRI data. I want to comment a little bit about something I said at one of the workshops, the Neuro AI workshop on Sunday. There was a bullet point with the phrase computational models of the brain, and I kind of made the point, like the amount of neuroscience and neural detail in these types of models at the workshop were minimal, to put it lightly. I think the phrasing there is computational model of brain responses, which speaks to the representational point. Great, if you want to model the representations, that's great, but don't call it a model of brains, or don't call it models of brain computations, because unless you're making a deep claim that the structure in your neural network are the computations that gave rise to those representations, if that's the claim you want to make, great, but show me the evidence that that is the case, versus a more shallow claim that, you know, the output of my model matches the output of the brain at some level. Yeah, and then there was a comment about understanding the sources of fMRI, and that I would upvote that strongly. We need to understand where the data comes from, the limitations, et cetera. I think this crowd could use some more of that kind of data methodology stuff, and I'll stop there.
All right, thanks. Let's take one more point. Thanks.
So I'm going to be a bit provocative here and claim that we don't have a mature methodology from a different perspective. I think the optimism about our methodology comes in large part from those scientists that study sensory processing. And I think as soon as you look downstream from those sensory processes, all of the cognition that happens between understanding what's out there and producing a motor command, I think our methodologies are much, much less mature. So we need to understand either how to translate the methodology that has been very well developed, I think, over the last decade for sensory processing into downstream cognition, or maybe develop completely new methodologies for those processes.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's return to these later. Let's get through into the next topic.
Yeah, so I think that as we're thinking about how we should do science, we also ask ourselves what is or should be the purpose of CCN. So some of the survey responses focus on CCN, the conference or the community. So one of the things, so we asked this during the survey, one of the things that really popped up quite a lot was this idea of CCN as, the purpose of CCN is to exchange ideas across disciplines. It's to bring together researchers from different but interlinked disciplines through psychology, cognitive science, neuroscience, and AI, and to bring together researchers from multiple fields together and share knowledge. And so this is really, I think, about CCN, the community, but then what is sort of another purpose of CCN? Well, another purpose of CCN that you all responded with is that we really want to be doing foundational science about the brain and mind. So, for instance, building the right level of abstraction for understanding the brain, bridging between computational psychology and neuroscience to enable a better understanding of the human mind and brain. So this is the foundational science aspect, but then there's another aspect, which is maybe a little bit more translational. So clinical and practical applications. Do we think about the purpose of CCN as touching on these things? So some of the responses here say that maybe CCN will help with psychopathology and learning and many other cognitive aspects. Another response said that perhaps CCN and the research at CCN can inspire new AI algorithms or help clinically. And so we actually asked explicitly a numbered response along these lines. So we asked people to give a number between strongly disagree and strongly agree on whether right now you think that insights and models from CCN are making a significant clinical or practical impact. And some people say that yes, they are. Some people say no, they're not, but we're kind of right in the middle here. That said, we also asked if we think that we will make a significant or clinical or practical impact in the next 10 years, and at least we're optimistic, right? At least everyone is like, okay, we're going to make progress in 10 years. We're going to move this a little bit forward. And we can actually see this also in the CCN abstracts where we look for the phrase clinical, and we see that that number is also increasing over the years. And this is much higher than the number of people, for instance, talking about neurotransmitters or hormones. So another thing that we wanted to hear from you about is if CCN is making a significant tangible contribution to other disciplines. So we asked this to disciplines beyond AI, and people say that actually, yes, we're making a contribution to other disciplines. And CCN is very interdisciplinary, and so maybe we come together here and then take it back to some of those other fields. But what we actually found a little funny here is that we think that CCN is actually making less of a significant contribution to the advancement of AI. And this was a little surprising to us just because people at CCN are working also in AI. And yet we think that we're sort of making contributions to these other fields much more than we're making contributions to AI. Along those lines, we've made you another word cloud. So these are the things that you think that we need to take from CCN and move into our models of AI. And so maybe some of these things could be used in order to better AI, or maybe they won't. So along with this, we also asked, given the success of AI, should we shift our research interest? And this definitely gave us some very, what I might say, hot takes. So we got opposite ends. We have Kendrick saying that the success of AI should cause us to reconsider and redefine what the ultimate goal of CCN is. So what is the purpose? It's a very existential question. But then on the other hand, we have people saying, no, why? That's a weird question. Why would we be asking this? We have a few people in the middle saying, if anything, we should prioritize building more biologically realistic models that AI has solved, or that we should actually shift our research focus into using AI for new experiments, where we can build much more diverse, interesting, and rich tasks with AI that still allow controlled experimental manipulation. So this is a way that we can shift our focus, but kind of harnessing the tools that now exist. And so we want to dig into this response a little bit, just kind of thinking about this as sort of with the shift of AI, what does that mean for the purpose of CCN? And so one of the survey responses that we actually really liked is this quote, which says, the biggest change since 2017 is that a lot of the topics that were the focus in 2017 were an academic curiosity with substantial potential, and now the connections between topics covered at CCN to applications out in the world are here. And I think that at the very beginning, when Benjamin was talking about these generative image models, that's one of these examples for what we see. And so now we have two responses that we would like people to sort of, I think you're both over here. So if you could get mics, Hendrik and Mark, that would be great to defend your points, which I think are a little bit on opposing ends here.
Hi, I'm Mark Leswa. I'm looking forward to Kendrick telling me why I'm dumb. I think this field is just getting good. I'm inspired by a lot of the, I work in fMRI perception and a little bit in attention now, and I have always been a little frustrated with the field of decision making and higher cognition because the models of stimuli on which decisions are based are usually like one parameter or something very simple. And that's been for the reason that it's just difficult to quantify stimuli. We don't know what image representations should look like, but I think we're getting a much better idea of that. And I'm seeing a little bit more willingness to engage with decisions in the real world under natural settings. And I think that that's really getting to like the kinds of questions that I've always wanted to ask and that are relevant to just understanding what a brain is so that we can say whether large language models and other types of networks are reasoning in the same way that humans are. And I think that just fleshing out our idea of how decisions are made in brains, how representations are structured, are just relevant questions to be able to do this AI alignment thing or just to evaluate these models as other decision-making entities in the world. So I don't know, I want to hear more from all of you, that's all I'm saying.
I like this because I talk to Mark a lot. He's an ever optimist, perhaps, with some cynicism, but I'm purely cynical. I guess let me contextualize what I meant by this. I was responding in the sense of societal impact in the largest sense. And we could talk about AI tools and what they're doing to the world and our field. I'm sort of an AI doomer. So that was the context in which I put forward. So to me, AI, the power of AI is the elephant in the room in many respects, not just in the field of CCN. When we started CCN, you can read the mission statement, I suppose, from 9 years ago. It was sort of definitional, at least our vision was it was like the intersection of these fields, and that included human intelligence specifically. Like I guess, didn't think of this conference as going to be, a venue for pure AI machine learning. So in that respect, I think with the success of this, alien technology or, alternative intelligence tool, like that changes the game here. I think Nico will have some thoughts. I'd be curious to hear what you think about that. So that's what I meant. And in terms of like broad societal impact, I think we could have maybe a political debate like that extends outside of the basic science that I think this conference is founded upon. But if that's the scope, that's a whole nother discussion, and I worry about the future, really. Anyway, so hopefully that gives you some insight into why I said what I said.
We have a lot of questions, so I am going to institute the timer.
So, yeah, I agree that the success of AI transforms cognitive computational neuroscience, but I don't think that its societal relevance vanishes. On the contrary. So now we have all the tools that we need to do what we set out to do from the beginning, which is understand how brain computation works in animals and importantly in humans, right? And that gets shorter shrift at other neuroscience conferences. Now we can actually do that. And is that irrelevant to society to understand how the human mind and brain work? No. Is it irrelevant to AI? Maybe in a very narrow sense, yes. AI is having its great moment, and we should be envious of that. That's wonderful, and we're doing a separate thing called science. But is it relevant for AI? Of course it is. A chatbot is an agent that lives in a world of conversation with a human. Any agent needs a model of its world. So AI needs a model of the human mind and brain to interact with humans successfully. So, to me, this is just like a huge opportunity also for more impact for cognitive computational neuroscience.
I'm going to try to stick to 1 minute. It would be a very sad, sad, sad day when scientists abandon the science they're doing because they think something was successful. And so I was sad to read your comment there. I hope that we realize, especially in the era of AI slop, as we are seeing a lot of it converging to what can be commensurate within a vector space of a particular era of time in the beginning of sort of what AI can do, to abandon what humans can do or align ourselves with it would be a huge disservice to the history of science. And some of us, at least, I hope we see ourselves as continuation of thousands of years of humans resisting various forces to continue to do science. Various modes of oppression, various modes of prosecutions of scientists, various modes of becoming irrelevant, various modes of being funded out. And I think at least some of you are fired up by the fact that some of us need to carry some torch of science, and it's ironic that I say this while I'm a principal researcher at Microsoft Research working on AI. But I continue to manage to do academic work, and that is, in my mind, the ideal, to continue science. And if anything, others can worry about AI, so many conferences. Maybe we should actually double down and focus on brains, on animal and human brains, and on the ways in which, not to help AI necessarily just with the cognitive models of the brains, but also how are we changing as a result of these closed loop that we are in it with AI right now. So I invite everyone to think about carrying that torch and think about how can we preserve natural intelligence's sovereignty in some way, if we can.
Hi everyone, my name is Aida Mir Ibrahimi. I'm a grad student at Carnegie Mellon. So I just wanted to, this is my first CCN as well, and I can't really speak to what the purpose of CCN was or has it changed, but I can speak to what I hope as a trainee to see as the purpose of CCN, and it's very much aligned with what Aida and Nico are saying. I think we have so many AI conferences out there that can focus on, maturing this technology. And I feel like CCN has, especially now, a very hard responsibility of continuously reminding itself of its purpose, which has to be focused on the science aspect of things and also translating basically the tools that are out there in AI. I feel like when the purpose of our research becomes to contribute to AI, that's where CCN might lose its clarity on its mission, and we need that more than anything right now because of all the concerns that are out there with the pace and the priorities of the AI community. So that was just all I wanted to add.
And then how about we go over?
Okay, I'm Dan Handwerker. I want to use Kendrick's and Zhao-Ming's critique of fMRI as an analogy. The huge successes of fMRI are when we know its strengths and we know its limits, and we design our studies that play to its strengths and not its limits. The failures are when we forget that, or when we forget that we have the street lamp of fMRI pointing on something and we're ignoring everything that it can't do. So the failures are we're ignoring, and I think that I'm seeing hints of that here as well. In that a few years ago, there's all this stuff like, oh, hey, this is what a deep neural network can do. How does that compare to what's happening in the brain? And I'm seeing hints at this meeting that, oh, this is what a deep neural network does. Let's find circuits in the brain that we think are most similar to deep neural networks. And let's say, how similar are they to deep neural networks? Instead of pushing more, okay, what areas just cannot be modeled by DNNs? What functions does this technology break down and does not model the brain or does not succeed well? And on the larger questions, I think that's where this community has potential to be. It is a good voice and has a potential to be a stronger voice. There's so much AI hype out there, which takes a really real and really useful and really valid technology and just hypes it way beyond both the computer science and the neuroscience. And this is a group where we have all these people together that can play, is playing a role and can play, I think, a bigger role in having discussions and public forums that push back against that hype of where does the spotlight of AI, what are we doing because that's what the current tech works at, and what are we missing because we're kind of ignoring where it fails.
Okay. Thank you. And then we'll take these two last questions here.
I think it's important when we think about the relationship between CCN and AI to think about there's like kind of two camps. Do we think that understanding the brain is going to make AI better? Or do we think that the tools that we have from studying the brain can help us understand AI? So I think, honestly, in the first sense, I don't think we have much hope right now. I think AI has chosen a path, and the nuanced insights we can get from our studies of the brain are not going to dramatically alter that path anytime soon. But this room has, a bunch of people who know how to analyze behavior, who know how to analyze representations, who also have technical knowledge of how AI systems work. And that's really important both for our own purposes. I mean, I've argued that we should use these models as test beds for reflecting on the analysis we apply to the brain and to behavior. And also people want to know if these systems work like humans. So our ability to do that comparison and analysis is societal impact in my mind.
Hi, I'm Pushpita. So not to entirely back Kendrick, but I think there is this aspect of given how advanced ARIA models are right now, and a lot of them can in fact do research, there is a question about or there is maybe a way we should think about how to make our or human research quality higher, given if you can define a lot of questions that are using models or open source data sets, it is possible that cloud agents could finish that, let's say, research or doing a whole lot of analysis in a very short time period. So then there would be a question of okay, if these agents can answer very defined specific questions with a bunch of computations that are available online. So we want to, I guess, in some way think about what should be the human research quality in that sense, and how can we ask more creative questions and maybe ask questions that are a bit messier to think about, because the more defined questions could be very easily answered by agents. So yeah, if we could think about some kind of standard that will be able to differentiate what AI can do versus what they cannot do, and where human creativity and ingenuity is going to be very important. So yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move to the last section here, and then yeah, after this there's lunch to continue all discussions. So moving forward, we really want to think about where the community thinks we can make progress, given that we've yeah, given the discussion that we've had.
Oops, sorry. Okay, so some of the questions that we would love to hear your thoughts, and we would love for you guys to continue thinking about them. Are we reinventing the wheel as a field? Are we as a community, or are we telling the brain what it should be doing? And also, does theory have to match humans at all? And for this, we would love to hear from Wenji, if you could tell us more on what you think about this.
Hi, my name is Wenji. I really enjoyed the discussion here. I feel like when we're talking about AI and neuroscience, we usually come from the direction of how we can use AI as cognitive models to understand neuroscience, and how do we use our understanding of human cognition and neuroscience to improve AI as an engineering artifact. But I wonder if we're missing another scientific topic here, is that whether these artificial systems instantiate a principle of general cognition that is not what we see in human and in the brain. And I wanted to ask everyone this question: can we build theory of general cognition without directly referencing to human? So I've been reading a little paper from when AI and cognitive science were just established as a field. And I feel like back then, a lot of cognitive scientists, they're AI researchers themselves. But I feel like over the years, like we have become a very human-centric field. And that makes a lot of sense because we have been the only blueprint of general intelligence, and we still is. But I feel like we are seeing a lot of these models with very interesting behaviors, and we're trying to use it to explain the brain, but then we have this difficulty that what is this explanatory power of these models, given that they don't have any of the biological details that humans have. So instead of thinking about how do we better use these to understand human cognition, can we reconsider what is the target of our research? Are we interested in human brain and cognition per se, or which I think is very useful for societal, clinical, and education purpose, but are we also interested in more general principles that maybe now we have the tool to study? So to make this, to give this a little more concrete context, I used to model child development using neural networks, using human data, and now I'm doing a PhD at Carnegie Mellon University, and I work in a language and robotics lab. I don't care about building better robots. All I want is to build cognitive theories, and I feel like being in this robotics lab gives me a lot of data and technology access to thinking about questions such as language and embodied experience, which I don't necessarily could have in a psychology lab. So it's my perspective as a junior researcher that I find it both hard to publish in an AI venue because they don't have science question like this. I also find it hard to connect with a cognitive science and neuroscience venue, although I've been finding CCN very friendly, but it's hard to publish without grounding it to human data. Thanks.
Thank you, Wenji. And so lastly, we wanted to finish this panel with some of the keywords to the question of what problem or topic you think CCN will solve in the coming 10 years. So we have talked a lot about how, most of us or some of us are being very optimistic about the future. And so here we wanted to also kind of throw some of the words that we found in your responses on the slide as well. And finally, one person also said that they are looking forward to being surprised, which we thought was really nice way to end this discussion. We are really grateful to all of you guys who share thoughts and all of you guys who responded or at least opened a survey and thought about them. We program committee are we hope that you guys continue to think about these questions and also enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much for being here.
That was a really interesting discussion and totally the CCN spirit of letting everyone kind of be able to talk. So it's really awesome. Two quick announcements. One is that as you're leaving, you should definitely put a pin in the pin board for Ben's analysis so that we get a stamp of what the field is like this year. And then also, I don't know if Joe Toscano is here. Are you here in the audience here? Well, Joe Toscano is a program officer from NSF. And he asked to make everyone aware that he's in the audience, like if you can find him. He's happy to talk about funding opportunities at NSF through various neuroscience and cognitive science programs and AI programs and things like that. So be on the lookout, and if you have questions about the current funding climate and stuff like that, he might be able to answer those for you. So, great.